What makes this phase different from everything China has experienced before is that the pressure is now coming from every direction at once. In the past, China could always lean on something external to buy time. Cheap labor absorbed rural migrants. Foreign demand absorbed excess supply. Infrastructure absorbed debt. Real estate absorbed savings. Each imbalance was masked by another engine still running at full speed. Today, nearly all of those shock absorbers are cracked. Labor is no longer cheap enough to compensate for collapsing margins. Global demand is no longer infinite enough to absorb endless output. Infrastructure no longer creates real productivity gains. Real estate no longer feels safe enough to anchor household wealth. The system has run out of places to hide inefficiency. This is where the United States enters the picture, not as a villain, but as a mirror. For decades, the US played the opposite role in the global system. China produced. America consumed. China saved. America borrowed. China exported deflation. America imported it. This symbiosis was not accidental. It was the backbone of globalization. Cheap Chinese goods kept US inflation low. US demand kept Chinese factories running. Dollars flowed out. Goods flowed in. Everyone pretended this was sustainable. It wasn't. It was convenient. Now that convenience is breaking down. As China floods global markets with underpriced goods, the US no longer responds with consumption alone. It responds with policy. Tariffs. Subsidies. Industrial strategy. Not because American leaders suddenly discovered nationalism, but because the math stopped working. You cannot run a domestic economy on services and debt forever while your industrial base evaporates. Eventually, the bill arrives in the form of fragile supply chains, geopolitical vulnerability, and political backlash. That backlash is already visible. The Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, massive green subsidies. These are not free market decisions. They are defensive reactions to a system where one country refuses to let prices rise to sustainable levels. The US is no longer competing on efficiency alone. It's competing on resilience. And resilience is expensive. This is the new fault line of global capitalism. On one side, a system that suppresses prices to maintain output and control. On the other, systems that tolerate higher prices to preserve domestic capacity and political stability. Neither side is pure. Neither side is stable. But they are no longer compatible in the way they once were. This matters because capitalism relies on shared assumptions. Prices signal value. Losses force exit. Profits reward risk. When one major player suspends those assumptions at scale, the entire system distorts. China's involution doesn't stay Chinese. It globalizes. When Chinese firms sell solar panels, batteries, steel, chemicals, or electric vehicles below cost, they reset global price floors. Western firms face three options: accept losses, exit the market, or demand protection. Most choose protection. And once protection becomes normal, the era of frictionless trade ends. This is why trade tensions are not a temporary phase. They are structural. But the deeper layer is this: China's overproduction is not just competing with foreign firms. It is competing with its own future. Every yuan used to subsidize unprofitable output is a yuan not used to raise household incomes. Every factory kept alive by credit teaches workers that productivity does not lead to pay. Every price war reinforces the belief that effort leads to exhaustion, not advancement. This is how middle classes stagnate. China lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty by turning labor into income. But income growth requires pricing power. Pricing power requires scarcity, innovation, or brand. Involution destroys all three. When everything is abundant, nothing is valuable. When products are identical, brands disappear. When margins vanish, innovation dies. The economy looks strong from the outside and feels weak from the inside. People feel this before governments admit it. Graduates compete for jobs that pay less than expected. Families watch property values stop rising. Entrepreneurs see profits disappear despite rising sales. The same message repeats everywhere: more effort, less reward. This is where psychology becomes economics. An economy runs on expectations. When expectations collapse, behavior changes. People save more, spend less, take fewer risks, delay families, delay consumption. Demand weakens further. Overcapacity deepens. The loop closes. Beijing understands this loop. That's why it talks about consumption, innovation, quality growth. But talk doesn't change incentives. Only failure does. Allowing failure is the red line. Failure means factories close. Jobs vanish. Local officials lose promotions. Banks admit losses. GDP numbers fall. Politically, that is poison. So continuity is chosen over correction. Rational short-term, disastrous long-term. Japan made the same choice in the 1990s. Zombie companies. Rolled over debt. Protected employment. The result wasn't collapse. It was stagnation. Decades of lost momentum. China's position is more dangerous because it is not yet fully rich. It faces aging demographics, geopolitical pressure, and a global system no longer willing to absorb its excesses quietly. Japan-style stagnation is not survivable at China's income level. And there is no painless outcome for the rest of the world. If China continues exporting deflation, global industries hollow out and backlash accelerates. If China pulls back sharply, supply chains snap and inflation returns. Either way, cheap stability is over. The global system built around Chinese efficiency was a one-time phase. It worked when China was filling gaps, not crushing margins. That era has ended. Now comes adjustment. Adjustment is never clean. Europe must choose between ideals and survival. Strategic autonomy costs money. Voters want cheap goods. Governments want jobs. Trade-offs replace slogans. The US accepts higher inflation tolerance in exchange for supply security. Efficiency is redefined as control. Emerging markets suffer most. Chinese overcapacity suffocates their industrial paths before they begin. Dependence deepens. Inequality hardens. At the center of it all is China, running faster to stay in place. The tragedy isn't that China built too much. It's that it built incentives that reward motion over meaning. Growth became a metric. Production became proof. Efficiency became identity. And identities resist change. China optimized for scale, speed, and control. It succeeded. But optimization without balance always overshoots. It exhausts itself. This is not a moral failure. It's systemic. Capitalism unchecked concentrates excess. State capitalism unchecked preserves it. China combined both. Markets demand exit. Politics demands continuity. Credit delays the reckoning. But credit is finite. Legitimacy is fragile. Belief cannot be manufactured forever. This is the real test. Can a system suppress failure permanently without killing innovation? Can an economy grow without losers? Can efficiency survive without profit? History says no. Empires don't collapse loudly. They erode quietly. The future shrinks. Effort yields less. Motion replaces progress. That is involution. It doesn't explode. It normalizes. Factories run. Exports rise. Headlines celebrate scale. Value drains out beneath the surface. China must choose, rewrite incentives or double down. Either choice reshapes the world. If it reforms, the shock is internal and healing. If it doesn't, the shock is global and contagious. This story isn't about China winning or losing. It's about whether a system that never stops producing can survive when production no longer creates value. Because economies aren't judged by what they make. They are judged by what they make possible. And a system that makes everything cheap but nothing hopeful is not efficient. It is exhausted. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History doesn't repeat. It compounds. And we are inside the compounding phase now.